So what my kind of own assessment of the situation is that considering that we are oral cultures, people are still not buying everything that is coming to them digitally, and the large part of India, proportionately speaking, is still not connected. The smart devices are still a luxury. There are fundamental infrastructure challenges. There are kind of issues in terms of the resources, because the divides are more and more deeper, especially post-pandemic. So the conventional traditional print is still kind of valuable and credible. And as far as journalism education enrollments are concerned, I still don't see much to worry about, because there are students coming in public institutions. What is happening is the kind of increasing insulated living of individuals, because we still don't have representation of all kind of people in the journalism schools. So one of the factor that I personally feel worried about is the kind of people who are coming into journalism schools vis-a-vis the kind of people who are getting into professions, because it is still not mandatory for anyone to be trained as a journalist to become a journalist. So fortunately, in a way, because it gives also an opportunity to a lot of people to become journalists. So that's kind of another way of looking at it. But the way I see the present kind of times is a kind of a lot of possibilities and opportunities, because the technology has made kind of village journalist without having kind of any training. Technology has enabled people to deliver what they are interested in. I'm not getting into the worry of how platforms will control, because my understanding is that the way people are going, they are also going still on a kind of word of mouth, and there is a lot of social connect which is still not kind of collapsed. So my understanding is that it's a kind of pretty exciting times at this point in the South Asian circuit to kind of look at what is happening, because we still don't have a newspaper. The kind of World Association of Newspaper data says that there has been only a 20% down in terms of circulation, especially in a kind of Indian markets. So compared to the kind of directions in other parts of the world, I think we are still kind of not so bad. No doubt the jobs have been cut off. There has been a kind of a severe impact in terms of the way people have been kind of told to leave their jobs as journalists is something to kind of be worried about. And at the same time, they're looking for a new avenues and new jobs, and a lot of them are becoming politicians. That's another interesting trend. So that's broadly on my end at this point, and then I'll kind of come back in terms of how I see the future once we kind of go to the next segment.
Thank you, Professor Desai, to provide us quite, insightful understanding about, the interface between the profession and the academic practices in South Asia, particularly from your own context. But we certainly would get into that discussion, how we see the future. At this point, I am inviting Dr. Pradeep Veresinghe, who is the senior lecturer in mass media faculty of graduate studies, University of Colombo, and also chairman of the National Secretariat for Media Reforms and National Communication Consultant to the ADB funded Health System Enhancement Project. He was a member of Ministerial Committee on Electronic Media Regulation, member of the Right to Information National Task Force, member of the Presidential Media Awards Jury, thematic head of National Summit on Media Reforms, and many more. Certainly, and he received his BA in Economics from International Relations and Journalism from University of Colombo, and then he has got his MSc in Mass Communication from University of Kelaniya and PhD in Mass Media from the University of Wuhan. So now I'm inviting Dr. Veresinghe to deliver his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ratan, Chairperson. The outstanding features in the field of mass media industry in Sri Lanka is the lack of accuracy, impartiality, and responsibility, which are the media standard commonly recognized internationally. these are realities faced by the media industry, are directly linked to the media education of the country. About 35,000 graduates with the subject of mass media and about 200 diploma holders entered to the job market every year from the universities in Sri Lanka. Apart from universities, the various institutes conduct diploma and certificate courses on media and journalism. In addition, media and communication are taught in the secondary education school, secondary school curriculum in Sri Lanka. University media studies degree programs in Sri Lanka have been criticized for failing. It is argued that at present the university media degree programs has failed to produce graduates with the qualities expected by the media industry. According to media managers, the reasons for mass media graduates not qualifying for the media industry are, even though the graduates have theoretical knowledge, they do not proven the ability to put them into practice. The degree programs does not motivate the students to develop the analytical skills and critical thinking and creativity. Those are the criticism on mass media graduate from the side of media industry. On the other hand, the allegation made by the society against the media industry should also be considered. The society claims that the damage incurred by the mass media on the society is vast. The society claims that media firms use the power of fourth estate in irregular manner. They are not sensitive of the social responsibility of media. That's criticism comes from the society. As a result, today the society does not recognize the media personnels as professionals in Sri Lanka. There are a number of factors that decide the outcomes of professional level media personnel from the university. What is the weight of the percentage given for skill training and theory and concept in the degree program curriculum? There are teachers with the capacity for teaching in skill development and theoretical concept in a balanced manner. 90% of the teachers who teach mass media and journalism in Sri Lankan universities have no practical experience in the media industry. This is a structural and policy issue regarding media education in Sri Lankan context. This situation has adversely affected the obtaining of the desired results from the media degree programs in Sri Lanka. For example, 90% of the graduates of Sri Lankan universities after completing their degree in mass media are engaged in government employment outside the field of mass media. A number of weaknesses could be identified in the mass media curriculum at present. curriculum have been planned with result orientation and not on a process orientation. Large space of opportunities given for theories and concepts, and lesser space is given for practical exercises. The second factor is that the curriculum of the university mass media degree program does not address the changes that are taking place in the contemporary media industry. For example, in today media industry, content production and distribution are based on a convergent media model, but university degree programs still teach print media, radio, and television separately. Due to the failure of media education in Sri Lanka today, media activism, the most powerful social institution in contemporary society today, is developing in a manner that is detrimental to the good of mankind. This is the contemporary media education landscape in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Verisinghe, to provide us the insights about the lags and the gaps where with the facts and certainly with the cases, the weaknesses about the communication, mass communication, education. Also, the points that you have raised, in terms of you have highlighted the policy issues. We are certainly we are going to have more discussions on that line. But now I will open the floor for Professor Gopalan Ravindran. And before I give it to him, I just want to quickly introduce. He is Professor and Head of the Department of Media and Communication, Central University of Tamil Nadu. Earlier, he was Professor and Head, Department of Journalism and Communication at the University of Madras. His research and teaching activities focus on the following areas: critical theories and philosophies, political economy of journalism and communication, spatiality, temporality, and materiality of communication, critical pedagogies in journalism and communication, film cultures, digital cultures, and diasporic cultures. He is also the General Secretary of AICMA, All India Communication and Media Association. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ratan. Thank you. Good evening. As I have mentioned, I would be focusing on the contestations between journalism in India on the one hand and journalism education in India on the other hand, and how these are impacted greatly and badly by the cultures of the land. There is a rich body of literature on print cultures which seek to contextualize the implications of the printed books on people and cultures in different countries during different periods. The logic of print cultures seldom invoke the contestations between the sides of orality and print, particularly the print cultures made possible by the members of oral cultures in their appropriations and misappropriations, within quote, and in their denials of the attributes of the print. That is to say that in these studies or in these works on print cultures, we don't come across how these print cultures are made possible by the appropriations, misappropriations, and denials of members of or members of secondary oral cultures, such as ours. The problematic of Indian journalism and Indian journalism education is located in this site. Secondly, the cultural logic of literacy is oral, and the functioning logic of literacy is visual. McLuhan said beautifully in his 1966 work that the text is visual as we use our visual faculty to read. And in the case of the unlettered person or the so-called illiterate person, who we have come to ignore, and we are very indifferent to the knowledge production by these unlettered persons. They use the ears to be literate, so they are literate otherwise. But the advocates of print culture ignore the presence and contributions of this unlettered person because he cannot read in the expected manner. He cannot produce a text in the expected manner. This becomes the basis of the contestation between print and oral in a culture that is predominantly wedded to primary orality. If we believe in the dichotomous categorization of Walter Woe, so he talks about primary orality and secondary orality. I don't agree with it entirely, but for the purpose of amplification of thoughts, if we believe that Indians by and large are caught between these two kinds of orality, the question is, what becomes of journalism, which is primarily print-based, and it is non-oral. So the contestation from the side of orality or sites of denial of news. Because of this, what is happening, particularly in vernacular journalism, I'm not a specialist in all kinds of vernacular journalism, but at least in the state of Tamil Nadu, where I have been following journalism for the last 45 years. I find the site of denial of news. News, conventional logic of journalism, is an objectified form of information and is valued as a credible source of knowledge about events in one's cultural territory. So we have Indian newspapers, we have newspapers in the vernacular languages, we have Malayalam newspapers, Telugu newspapers. All these are seen by academics like us as sites of objectified forms of knowledge and credible source of knowledge. We are not conscious of the downside of this objectified form of information. So the very form of news is the bane of journalism, Indian journalism, in my opinion. I can't talk about journalism in Britain or journalism in other countries where there is a close semblance between this objectified form of information and the culture which made it possible. What I'm trying to say is we did not make possible this objectified form of information. It is one thing to buy from a Levi's shop in India and wear it, and quite another to read a newspaper which has a form of knowledge that was stitched somewhere, that was made possible somewhere in another's cultural territory. So because of this, the audience like us, who are unlettered, not like us, no, we are all very illiterate people, we think, but the illiterate people or the semi-literate people or the average readers, the rickshaw pullers or auto wallahs, they make their denial mode to disrupt the order of knowledge that is sought to be deployed by the printed words of newspapers and books. This is because of the certain divergence between the decoding practices peculiar to members of these oral cultures, and these decoding practices fail to match the encoding practices peculiar to print journalism. Peculiar to print journalism because of the institutionalization of these encoding practices that belong to a long-drawn historical process of journalism as a trade, profession, and a much valued institution of democracies in the West. These are at odds with the much longer historical process of orality as a site of communication. And one specific example I can get you is the fictionalization of the objectified form of news in the case of South Indian newspapers, particularly in Tamil Nadu, where the epic tradition, epic narrative tradition works at cross purposes and completely disrupts the sanctity of journalism within quotes. So here, the functioning logic of the order of the text are acquired through sound and presented in print. That is epic tradition. Okay, the functioning logic of the order of text are given to us through sound. I've always been given to us through sound, but they are presented in print now in the same mode, that is the epic mode of narrating a story. That is making stories within stories of a simple news story. So a simple news story cannot exist in this context because there are so many sub-stories and headings. Okay, so I don't know whether I have time. I will stop here. Okay. Finally, one final point about how this contrasts with the culture of journalism education. So we have to prefix culture with the words journalism education in India. We would be highly instrumentalistic and functionalistic if we talk only about journalism education. We would be serving the purpose to some extent, not entirely, to some extent. If we are talking about the culture of journalism education, the culture of journalism education is problematic, just as the culture of print is problematic, because it is modeled on Western models of higher education, to Western models of curriculum. I am not here to say Western models are not good or not the suited models. I'm only trying to draw the incompatibility between Western models of higher education. We seek to teach another Western cultural import such as journalism to Indian practitioners such as the students and teachers. So it's a case of growing misfit. Okay, so that's it. So it's a case of misfit. It's a case of misfit because of the cultural contestations from the local cultures in invisible modes. Even if we are belonging to a certain class, these invisible modes of orality rears its head and defeats the objectified form of news. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Gopalan. You have raised a very conceptual question to us, which we need to actually engage much more, because the culture of journalism education and parallelly the development of journalism as a practice and connecting with to the Indian democracy. And as we hear from you about the Indian context and the reality, we want to move to Bangladesh and want to hear from Professor S.M. Shamim Reza, who teaches media and communication at the University of Dhaka. And as adjunct and guest faculty, he has contributed to a number of universities and academic programs, including the Regional Masters in Media Communication and Journalism in collaboration with the University of Dhaka, Nepal College of Journalism, University of the Punjab, and Oslo University College. He has over 2 decades of teaching and research experience in the field of media culture, politics, and society, children, young people and media, communication policy and development, NGO and communication, broadcast media and public sphere, media history. Professor Shamim Reza received his doctoral award from Goldsmith University of London. He studied media education at the University of New South Wales and anthropology of media at SOAS. And he he's also recipient of many awards and fellowship globally. So the floor is yours, Professor Reza.
Thank you. Yeah, good to see my good friends from South Asia. I can see Pradeep, Papan, Professor Das, my very good friend Jivod. Good to see you all. To start with, I'll be talking about some of the challenges that journalism schools are confronting these days, mostly on pedagogy, quality, curriculum, and so on. Some of these issues are very common to South Asia. Well, there are some specific problems which are very specifically located in the context of Bangladesh. Now, before going to talk about the problems of journalism education at the schools or somewhere else, let's have a quick idea of the issues and challenges that Bangladesh journalism is facing at the moment. In terms of issues, there are a number of policy issues have emerged these days. One of them is, for example, Digital Security Act. So the journalism, online journalism related activities are being shaped and informed by the act called Digital Security Act. So there are a number of clauses, there are a number of things being considered, to be crime and non-bailable, and there are very pertinent issues which is directly affecting online journalism activities, the formal journalism, formal publication, or citizen journalism, or any form of activities online. Then there is a problem of dealing with the new format, which is also affecting the presentation of news. Like there's the same kind of news which wouldn't have been a news in the print media, but in the online version it's a news, like 2 lines, 3 lines, for example. So there has been lots of discussion about the definition of hard news, how to present featureized news, how to present investigative news. So because of the changes of format from very traditional print media to online to e-paper, things are changing. I'm not going into the discussion of Marshall McLuhan with the medium is the message. I'm not being that deterministic, but this is an important area that should be looked into in the Bangladesh context. And then there are issues of freedom, which might be looked at from a very different perspective. Freedom, the government is saying, well, things are fine, nobody's controlling nothing. But the journalists are, raising number of issues. The rights organizations have a number of issues related to freedom, and there's a business pressure. After the proliferation of print media, after the fall of last autocratic government in this country in 1990, there was a proliferation of print media and the proliferation of electronic media in the late 90s, along with Indian proliferation of television stations. But the problem is that all of them are owned by big media house, big business houses. So the same house owns a television, a newspaper, a radio, and online, whatever something. So it's a package. 4 or 5 types of media being owned by one business organization. And there is a serious concern of job security. From my personal experience, when I sit in an interview board or in a recruitment board, many of the applicants applying for the post of public relations officer or communications officer, for example, or if I'm sitting in a board of non-governmental organizations looking for a communications guy, are coming from journalism background, like 7 years, 8 years of experience. And when I'm asking why do you want to live, in the media house, you are just in a very good position. After 10 years, you'll be in a commanding position. There's a no. There is a sense of job security, and also there is a real situation of job security. So you want to switch their profession to NGOs, to international organizations, or to public relations kind of. And that's the overall issues. The bigger challenges that, and to me, is public confidence in news media. We haven't got any studies available whether the public has got confidence in the traditional media and the emerging media, so what kind of media. So unlike the BBC confidence studies or Reuters studies, we don't have anything. Neither the journalism schools, conduct any such study, nor the media development organizations or NGOs. So we just talk about it, but we don't have any data in our hand. What is the public perception or public confidence in news media? And then the challenge of new media and citizen journalists. When I go for any training at the local level, some local journalists stands up, say, have you seen my television channel? So what kind of television channel do you have? Because I have a YouTube television channel. So if I've got like 25 participants in my room, at least 20 of them have got television channels. And sometimes they're offended that I haven't watched the television channel. So everybody has got a television channel, a YouTube television channel. And then obviously the issues of featurized news versus the hard news and the investigative news, that's always there. Some people are arguing that the future of Bangladesh journalism lies in investigative journalism. Some say no, it's the hard news, or how to present the hard news in a featurized form. That's the bigger thing. So that's another, the challenge the overall journalism is facing. Now, coming to the state of journalism education. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels. Number one, the traditional universities. To start with, Dhaka University, established back in 1962 as the Department of Journalism. It was 1958, the Pakistan Press Commission, the Sayyidji Commission, that recommended 2 journalism schools, one in Sindh, currently in Pakistan, one in this part of, which is Bangladesh today. So they all started as a journalism department. And the objective obviously is related to the modernization in this part of South Asia, this part of Asia. So training them or orient them with the American style of journalism or European American way of journalism, modernizing journalism, modern politics, everything is modern. So they wanted to change the traditional Indian way of, writing news and more influence from the, Euro-American school. So that is how it all started. It was related to mass communication. Later on, when first started with journalism, and then the department was named as Mass Communication and Journalism. So since then, it's an integrated whole. So teaching journalism as mass communication, or teaching journalism as part of modernization tradition, teaching journalism, connecting it to public relations, to development issues, and all these things. So it hasn't changed much, despite the fact that these days we teach electronic journalism, we teach television journalism, which is online journalism, but one or another, it's still related to modernizing something, and Euro-American influence is very much there. Then come to the government training institute, like Press Institute of Bangladesh. There is the National Institute who teaches the electronic. So they offer diploma, like 1-year diploma or kind of master's degree. That has become very trendy these days. So if you are not attending traditional universities to study journalism, go to those government training institute and get their training. It's not exactly like Indian Institute of Mass Communication, which is a large setup, but it's like 1 or 2 institutions located in Dhaka, these diploma degrees. Then industry. Unfortunately, the industries these days do not have any journalism education program as such. So it's something like you find a guru, start working with him, and then eventually get mature like the old days. They used to have some training programs, but these I don't see any. And then the professional bodies like Press Club or all other professional journalist bodies, even they have stopped providing the journalism training, be it for traditional journalism or for the broadcast journalism or the new media or the emerging journalism. On the other hand, this place has been taken over by NGOs and media development organizations. Now, they have become a big player over the last 2 decades. So they are teaching print journalism, they are offering public relations, they are teaching you television journalism, the number of very strong media development organizations teaching you radio journalism. I should note here that none of the journalism schools, I mean, the privately operated, the public schools, they offer radio journalism. All they have the traditional journalism and the video journalism. They call video journalism. But I should also note that some of the universities are just trying to introduce radio journalism with the help of foreign assistants, like Deutsche Welle, for example. And this media development organization who are providing all kinds of journalism training are being supported by organizations like DENIDA, European Union, USAID, Free Press Unlimited. So you can see from the traditional journalism school to many of the things that used to be taught by the professional bodies or by the media industry itself are now being taught by NGOs and media development organizations. Now, let's straightway come to the challenges of the issues that are confronting in relation to media education. Number one is pedagogy. How do we teach? In what manner are we teaching? What Ravindra Gopalan has said and Pradeep also says is a big challenge. So if you, after getting a degree, if you go to media industry, in Bangladesh would understand, they say, Ki shikhe asche etodin? I mean, what have you learned thus far? I mean, it's not very relevant to the industry, to the news industry, but these students were taught mass communication, they are taught cultural studies, they were taught, all very good things, quite up-to-date things. But when they are, joining a newspaper, be it a vernacular newspaper or English newspaper or television or whatever, the criticism is there that it's not enough. It's not relevant to the industry. So you have to start afresh. So let's have a new beginning. Now, second problem is that as a profession, I mean, that is also, I think, affecting the mindset of the graduates. Well, so they are studying in the journalism schools, as I say, it's an integrated whole, not separately journalism. It's a mass communication in journalism or media communication in journalism or media studies and journalism. So sometimes they're in a fix where they should focus more on the practice of journalism. I mean, intending to become a professional journalist, or they should keep the avenue open. Let's have bits and pieces of PR, bits of development communication or something. So your job market is quite secured and open. So if you don't get an opportunity in the journalism arena, then you can, always go somewhere else. And then comes the question of bridging that gap. And who would bridge that gap? These days, there has been lots of discussion about collaboration. And they call industry academia collaboration, academia market collaboration. But we don't see any kind of formal initiative of this kind of collaboration, at least at the public university level. Some of the private universities are trying. I mean, they are trying, making good contact with industries, particularly with the English newspapers and some international organizations, some media development organizations, but making a formal agreement with public universities are quite complicated and bureaucratic, so it doesn't happen always. And now the other problem is this type of journalism. Like, we have the traditional, Ravindra Gopalan has fantastically pointed out that we're still print media based. So whatever thing we are teaching in the journalism schools, in the public universities, are actually, it's being conditioned by our oral tradition, our traditional, newspapers, printing, and all these things. Although we are teaching, kind of television journalism or other forms of new journalism, but the type, the format, the very culture is still print. I mean, the transition hasn't taken. So that's another, I think, a challenge. So overall, what I would say, there is a challenge of, the journalism education culture. There is a challenge of setting the tide. There is a challenge of bridging the gap between the education at the school and the industry. There's a pedagogical challenge. And finally, I think there is a challenge of streaming, which has been, I think is the thing that is lacking not only in Bangladesh, but also in South Asia, that should it compartmentalize? There should it teach like sports journalism and entertainment journalism? Should it teach political journalism? Should it teach development journalism? Something like this, or we should have a holistic approach of, teaching them the quality, the how to write, how to produce, how to disseminate, the way it is being demanded. The wake of fourth industrial revolution, should we follow the Indian model? Should we follow the China model? Should we still go back to the Columbia School of Journalism model that let's forget everything and put political journalism, sports journalism, and science journalism, and the will organically learn everything and survive in the market, whatever the format is, whatever the technology is. So with this, I would conclude that these are the challenges and the ongoing issues that we are confronting at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamim Reja. You have really pointed out that the contemporary challenges, while you have really identified some areas. Actually, the whole approach of journalism education, the compartmentalization of it, and also some of the policy issues which are in stake. And in the context of Bangladesh and even South Asia, we know that the issues of policies are quite great, and we need to much engage scholarly and intellectually to that. And I believe that our next speaker, Vibod Parthasarathi, will highlight on some of these issues. Before I give it to him, quickly to introduce Vibod Parthasarathi is Associate Professor at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He teaches at the Center for Culture, Media and Governance. He has been at the forefront of media policy research in India and has won grants from SSRC, Ford Foundation, Canada's IDRC, University Grant Commission. He has been a visiting scholar at various universities such as University of Helsinki, University of Queensland, Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and he is a non-resident CMTS fellow at Central European University. Currently, he is part of two multi-country research initiatives, global media and internet concentration and digital platforms in the global south. He serves on the boards of Center for Internet and Society, Bangalore, the Media Foundation, New Delhi, and AICMA, All India Communication and Media Association, New Delhi. Vibod Parthasarathi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Given our shared colonial histories, I see three vectors that bind journalism studies across South Asia. One deals with how and why some ideas traveled from the colonial center and got normalized in our countries. So, for example, newspaper publishers in the 19th century being mandated to pay a deposit to the government in case they displease the regimes of the day. Other ideas that have traveled include a dominant form of journalistic writing and newspaper design, practices which Ravindran alluded to on this panel. The second vector pertains to questions about why some ideas got distorted after having traveled to colonial South Asia. What immediately comes to mind is the institution of public broadcasting. The British and West European defense of PSBs, both normative and ideological defenses, take for granted a certain personality of the state, which is at odds with what we have learned from long-standing scholarship on state formation in South Asia. The third vector of journalism studies shared across our region relates to the numerous commonalities in our experiences of the press, of journalism, and of journalistic cultures. The key here for me is to try and imagine the press as a constellation of interests. Swati Maheshwari has successfully done this in a recent article, and as did for would make us attend to comparable interests in our countries, impeding the development of certain values within the press, or recurrently stonewalling calls for public accountability. This is something my co-panelists Pradeep and Shabim have evoked in their own ways. So what are the challenges in tackling all this? I see some striking traits of journalism research in India that have hampered addressing the canvas I have visualized here. Foremost is the study of the press in all its forms, and the little that exists of journalism per se has been traditionally reduced to the study of news content, or at least has relied primarily on analysis of news content. And that, of course, then spills over into teaching as well. Second is the presentist, in fact, event-oriented approach to the news media. A large share of South Asian scholarship, both in situ and diasporic, gets confined by happenings, mishappenings, and related personalities marking our times. Third, that is beyond presentism and content-centeredness, I see a certain kind of medium-centered approach also dominating teaching and scholarship on journalism and news. Newspapers, broadcast news, and online journalism have been imagined as distinct fields, What is more interesting for me is that these three renditions of the news media have got associated with different phases of post-colonial India's political economy. So the expansion of newspapers was when the values of nation building were all encompassing. Private television news emerged out of the macroeconomic deregulation during the early 1990s, while digital news outlets have mushroomed amidst heightened neoliberal transnationalization over the past decade. So these three sides of journalism have got associated with three shifts in our post-colonial political economy. In fact, I find the celebration of these shifts is one of the key themes in teaching and scholarship on broadcast news and recently on online news, something I would be extremely cautious to do here. The presentist, content-centric, and medium-centric challenges to journalism studies has something to do with the fourth impediment here, and that's the absence of a robust body of work on press history. I think there are two reasons for this absence. One, which I feel holds true across South Asian scholarship, while the other is rather peculiar to India. Most of you would agree that media studies in South Asia really started coming into its own from the mid-1990s. Consequently, it leapfrogged into examining the milieu of journalism in satellite broadcasting and subsequently on the internet. So the formative conditions within which the press emerged, dating back to the end of the 18th century, have been grossly neglected. What we have are numerous antiquarian accounts of press and journalism history, which unfortunately have become the staple for undergraduate and graduate students here. The reason which in a sense is peculiar to India is that the accounts of the past have been enslaved by what I call a certain kind of methodological regionalism. This goes back to the history of press development and until recently press culture having evolved differently within India's numerous linguistic geographies there. I've tried to theorize the existence and significance of these linguistic markets in a recent book edited by my co-panelist Meera Desai. These linguistic geographies make it difficult for any comprehensive national history to emerge. On the other hand, it has also made it difficult to teach comparative regional histories, especially if we remain wedded to the study of news content, which of course involves reading totally different scripts here. This methodological regionalism is also visible in the much more vibrant and diverse scholarship on film studies here. What is interesting here, of course, is that these regional-centric orientation has been productively leveraged by insisting that the history of cinema in India is essentially a set of regional histories here. So within these conditions, the press history, the prevalent content and medium-centeredness, and the kind of malaise of methodological regionalism, how do we see the project of studies with the news media? The additional handicap here, of course, is that the larger wide-ranging attention from within South Asia. I would like to sort of underline that the pursuits of media history and media policy have an organic traction and should not be seen as pulling media studies in opposite directions. There is a need for journalism studies to involve institutional and regulatory questions as much as there is the need for media policy studies to be more historical. Beg your pardon. There are two key areas in press policy that ought to be attracting the students of journalism studies. One is on ownership and diversity in the news. There was a time when at least ownership vividly featured in public discourses and in newspapers themselves, although not much on TV, I should add there. But these debates have got sidelined in recent years. Perhaps one reason this has happened is due to debates on press freedom occupying attention over the last decade across South Asia. This is then the second key area that calls for systematic attention in press policy studies, as Shamim has just emphasized here. Here, I would urge that the principal tension needing to be scrutinized is that between constraints on the press, which are internal, and those which are external. So in other words, how does journalism studies look at the tension between freedom of the press and freedom in the press? So this takes me to the first area of attention in press policy, that of ownership. And then, of course, in turn, it rewinds us to one of my initial pleas, that of imagining journalism as a constellation of social interests. Here. I'll finish here. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Vibod Parthasarathi, for providing the insights and also highlighting the issues that the policy as well as the regulatory questions of media. Now we want to go for open discussion, but before that, to have a discussion, I want to invite our chair of the session, Professor Biswajit Das. And Professor Biswajit Das is professor and founding director of Center for Culture, Media and Governance. He has over 4 decades of teaching and research experiences in the field of theory, method, and history of communication in India. He has been a visiting professor at York University, Toronto, visiting professor, Department of British and American Cultural Studies, School of Global Communication, Kyonghee University, South Korea, and also adjunct professor, Center for Public Policy and Governance, Tezpur University, Assam. He has published in various national and international journals and in number of advisory board of several national and international journals. Professor Das's research interests are intellectual history of communication, media policy and governance, strategic communication, and media pedagogies. Currently, he is founding president of All India Communication and Media Association in India. Professor Das, I invite you to open this discussion and also at the end maybe reflect and deliver your concluding note. Professor Das.
Anyway, thank you, Ratan. In fact, I would like to thank the organizer, Steve and Vaibhav, for this whole South Asian conference, giving AICMA a space to showcase the various kinds of activities and the kind of thinking that is at the moment in the field of journalism education. I'm sure all of you will agree the kind of diversity or the diverse range of presentations which were made that reflects the nature of serious scholarship and thinking that has gone in the field of journalism education. Just to quickly, I will just stop by one line. I was just thinking when I was listening, I was also thinking about just one line I would like to say, maybe that later I would like to conclude. It was just, I was just thinking about education in other sectors in India and South Asia. It reminded me of engineering education. And it reminded me when I look back to one of the place where the British colonial officials built a beautiful dam with water flowing on the top and the roads going under below, that is in Roorkee in Uttar Pradesh. And in order to maintain that, they sort of started a diploma institution. They started a diploma institution where they wanted to train Indian people to be trained, but to be a diploma holder, not an engineer. And that was the idea. And that is how engineering education, and much has been captured. We know about Visvesvara Rai, the dam, and the engineer Visvesvara Rai during the royal patronage. And also we see in other sectors. But when we come to media education, even though we boast of saying it started in Madras to move to Punjab, undivided Punjab, and there is a much shifting which is taking place, and that also shift in terms of paradigm. There's a paradigmatic shift. We talk about an Anglo-Saxon to an Anglo-American, and that's a whole shift which has occurred. Probably we have never captured in what way this paradigm shift needs to be addressed or needs to be looked at within the larger journalism field or journalism education, because we accept identifying people. We have not done much about intellectual history of journalism in Indian context, except that we have looked at few institutions. Even we have not dealt much in detail about the curricular design, the kind of curriculum which were propagated. That is what one of my colleagues was talking about, pedagogies. I would like to leave it here. We had a brilliant presentation And maybe that there may be some of questions and crisscrossing within the panel itself. We would like to open it up. Maybe that I would like to sum up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Das. So maybe we can go like this, since we have begin the panel discussion with Professor Desai, we can begin from her, and if she has any points to raise and talk about the future, as the panel is also trying to highlight on how we are going to, face and also tackle the challenges of the journalism education in South Asia. So, Professor Meera Desai, do you want to add something at this point?
Sure. So it's kind of very interesting and fascinating, actually. The canvas is huge, very complex and very diverse and very kind of deep rooted in terms of the history, geography, political science and technology. I just wanted to kind of raise this point, since Professor Ravindran was talking about this subjective reading, and I found that personally very interesting, because I'm dealing with these young journalism educators these days, and I realize that their sense of time is very different from my sense of time, though I'm not that old, but still. And how does one deal, because we are talking about so many subjectivities in a kind of a complexity of South Asian cultures, and then when we talk about what we both talked about in terms of the fundamentals of freedom, in terms of the policy as well as the practice, how do you see? Like, where do we see going it? Because what my context was that my personal understanding was that journalism and future of journalism is only in the hand of the journalist. Like, I came across this very interesting paper by William Thomas Stead, who way back in November 1886 wrote about that by saying future of journalism depends entirely upon journalists. And I don't completely agree to it, obviously, but the fact is that I felt that the hope is left only there because the institutions and structures and state and all these are not going to be in tandem with the individual. So, where Professor Ravindran, if you can kind of probably start with that by saying, where do you see the subjective reading going? Because that's kind of pretty very, very fragmented. So I'm kind of curious, to be very honest. How do you see it shaping up?
Thank you, Dr. Meera, for provoking my thoughts on that subjectivity of reading. Reading comes in different flavors, as we know, in academic disciplines. We are too fascinated by the cultural studies logic of reading, this logic of reading, that logic of reading. But in India, these have no currency. So that's one of the reasons why even very good scholars who want to work in cultural studies cannot come to terms with the ground realities of text and reading. So text and reading are not the same as visualized by Stuart Hall in the Indian case. Stuart Hall belongs to a culture where reading was institutionalized as a print-based one. In our case, reading is a very fragmented one. It is simultaneously oral. Okay, reading is oral. It continues to be oral in many cases. It wants to be visual. Okay, it wants to be visual and cognitive. It also wants to be extra orality, or what I would call as a site of excesses of orality. One example I can give is I'm not sure whether it's the same case in all the South Asian countries, but in the case of proliferation of the digital banners and the posters, which have come to displace the sites of journalism in a big way. And journalism schools do not engage with these sites of print. So we have all along believed that print means journalism or books or something like that. But in much of Tamil Nadu, print is circulated outside the newspaper offices, outside the newspaper stalls. They are circulated in public space in a freewheeling manner, where reading is made possible by the excesses of orality. Okay, so by the excesses of orality, I mean something where the illiterate person or the semi-literate person or even the literate person engages with these printed words on the banners in their own modes of reading. Okay, so these banners are very emblematic, even though they are printed, even though they are products of the digital processes, they are emblematic. Okay, so they are accepted by these illiterate persons. These print cultures are much closer to oral cultures. And they are able to read them well. They are accepted. On the other hand, the same group of persons read the newspapers in denial mode. Okay, so there is this subversion of journalism going on rapidly, but unnoticed by journalism educators and journalism practitioners. We have a sense of arrogance because we belong to the domain of print. We are all products of print cultures. So we started acquiring something through this way. So we think that we are knowledgeable persons, but when we suspend our logic and try to engage with these people who have not gone to schools or who have not gone to universities and how they read, then we get into a fascinating world where print is severely challenged and subverted creatively by journalism is in for a deep shock, is in for a root shock if journalism and journalists discovers this reality. Most of us in journalism schools are blaming the digital as the culprit for the decline of print journalism. I don't think so. So the culprits are in these manifold reading practices of members of oral cultures. Thank you.
Dr. Pradeep wants to add something from Colombo, if you are able to hear us.
Yes, when considering the future of media education, sorry, the need for formal media education and training may be eliminated in the future, as media workers who have not received formal media education or training handle the future media landscape. It may also change the role of the media as the most powerful social institute in the society. And the media can create, produce, and distribute what they like in any way they like. It is the responsibility of the audience to choose what he likes and disposes of what he does not like. There are things like media ethics are ignored. Media ethics laws, regulations are needed not by the journalists, but by the audience. As a result, the four theories of press that exist in traditional media education may deviate from media studies and accept the logic of the last right theory. The last right theory is that the media practitioners can broadcast or deliver what they like or what they want in their way. It is the responsibility of the media consumer to distinguish between good and bad. Thank you.
Yeah, we both.
Yeah, so I think what is really interesting is, excuse me again, that we are kind of having these sort of two sets of imaginations running parallel. One, of course, is the desire to sort of think about the teaching of journalism in terms of honing skills and technique. That's sort of one thing which is coming out here, and the other is about, which of course also needs to be sort of rethought given the kind of challenges which are around us right now. And the other is to sort of try and reimagine what the canvas of journalism studies is, and I think very often both of these get conflated there, and in our sort of teaching programs they get conflated in such a manner that perhaps none of them actually get addressed. So I'm just wondering whether these two imaginations can actually sort of coexist, and if so, then how can the kind of reimagination of one, as in thinking of a sort of wider research canvas, feed into the reimagination of kind of more interesting forms of teaching here and relevant forms of teaching here. Otherwise, this schism will sort of just remain, and it will get sort of reproduced from department to department or from country to country. Yeah. I'm just wondering whether how can this be sort of reconciled there. And to this, and this was sort of not my question, but it came from what Pradeep said there. There is this other imagination of sort of journalism studies, in a sense, being also seen beyond journalists themselves, and sort of putting audiences in the center, which in that sense also means that journalism studies has some relevance to even those who are not studying journalism, those who are not in media schools. So you've got now these sort of three sort of very interesting springboards from which one could need to sort of try and imagine and kind of how these sort of three futures can sort of feed each other.
I think Professor Reja wants to say something so that we can then go to the chair of the session.
Okay. I mean, I'm generally, my understanding is that when we have this kind of discussion, we always follow the utility perspective, that we have a very structured kind of format at the university level or at the whatever higher education level where we teach journalism, and how to address the needs of the industry or the market. And that's the buzzword of the day. I mean, if you look at the concern of the University Grants Commission in South Asia, they're sending us lots of papers saying, why don't you have collaboration with industry, with market, and try to understand their needs, so that our work is to produce journalism graduates so that they are better accommodated in the industry. That's one point. Number two is dealing with technology. That's again a very school kind of perspective. That's how to deal with technology. And China has become an obvious experience that sometimes we hear the story, oh, it's like an industry. The Chinese graduates in the first year, they just enter the school. And when they become graduate, they learn how to deal with a satellite. And what the heck are we doing here? I mean, I'm just very layman, type. The kind of, the discourses that are going on here. And then providing the kind of education, should we provide them the basics of journalism so that when they understand everything, they can deal with any, kind of beat or any kind of situation, any types of journalism. And now, again, even from utility perspective, there are two streams. Number one, the potential graduates with journalism education, and those who don't have the journalism background or journalism education background, even they've never been to school, or graduate from other disciplines that already started working with the media, or in a peripheral situation, in a rural setup, in a mufassil setup. I mean, using the very colonial word. I mean, we have no access to educational journalism. That's one utility perspective. I mean, very kind of, housekeeping kind of thing that we discuss here and there. But I would subscribe to what Vibod is trying to say, that the larger canvas of, journalism education. In this sense, my take would be that we should really look into the historical perspective and should, combine the policy issues with it. I mean, we haven't had a good journalism history written yet. I mean, except for Natarajan's book, even these days we still, refer to the Natarajan's book of Indian history of journalism. We haven't seen a magnum opus or any kind of grand initiative in South Asia, including this Indian subcontinent and Sri Lanka, for example, if you add it, that what actually evolved and what are the development in terms of, teaching journalism, the policies of journalism, the culture of journalism, I mean, starting from both the colonial and the post-colonial and period. I mean, including the mainstream, the vernacular kind of thing, the policy challenges. Otherwise, what we'll be discussing is all this utility kind of thing, which is very technical. I mean, and there is, not much to, deep into or go deeper into. I mean, we can very easily solve it with incorporation of technology, with advanced training, this kind of thing. And then I think another challenge at the academia and people like us is how to deal with these issues of cultural studies, the traditional mass communication studies, and it's the kind of interrelationship with journalism. I mean, should journalism be studied, taught, imagined, and interpreted as a separate kind of discipline, or should it be part of cultural studies, something we have to understand, or should it very straightforward American school of mass communication? I mean, if you look at the situation in Bangladesh and the then Pakistan, the two types of, the journalism training were available at that time. Either you are sponsored by like Ford Foundation or the American Foundation to go to United States to learn American way of journalism, or there are Thompson Foundation possibly in Cardiff, where you get the American, way of, the British way of, in learning journalism. You come back home and you contribute either in Bengali newspaper or in English newspaper or the university level. But should our focus be analyzing that stream or the American training or the British training, or these days, over the last 1 or 2 decades, it's the Nordic training. You're going to Norway, you are going to Denmark, you are having, lots of very, varying kind of concepts being developed by the Germans, by the Danish, by the Norwegian, almost every year, having new ideas. Is that really our focus? So we should really try to incorporate cultural studies into it, to understand journalism within the context of cultural studies, within the context of mass communication tradition. If you believe in that's the way out. So overall, I think we should more focus on this, the policy of journalism education, the culture of journalism education, the politics of journalism education. I think combining all three, both in contemporary perspective and also in historical perspective, I think we can find a way out and can understand, can imagine, can deconstruct or reconstruct what we are talking about.
I think just to add on your point, Professor Reja, that I think the discussion, the whole point of this roundtable discussion is about also to have more cross-border understanding. And as the chair of the session was talking about the institutional history in South Asia, I think we have a huge gap in the country to country or the neighboring within South Asia, the shared understanding of the institution building and to tackle these challenges. So I think more and more, as you are saying about journalism education coming from West, and now it is from the Nordic, do we share among ourselves what kind of journalism education even we are indulging between India and Bangladesh, between Sri Lanka and Nepal, between Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka? Those kind of debates are also, I think, not getting much highlighted. So I would maybe request Professor Das to deliver his concluding remarks.
Thank you. I was just quickly thinking to raise few points, pertinent points. Maybe a take, which I was thinking probably one should address. I would like to highlight a little bit more about the educational perspective of journalism education, because we have been talking about journalism education from different strands, looking at politics, policy, technology, culture, and so on. But one basic ingredient when we talk about journalism education, from what to what extent we have sort of tried to address and look at it from an educational perspective. I mean, I refer, when we talk about educational perspective, I refer to teaching and learning about journalism education. I mean, any engagement with teaching and learning should not dissociate from questions about knowledge. I mean, questions on teaching and learning have been largely neglected and perhaps resulted in a state of confusion and misunderstanding between theory and practice in journalism education. In fact, you see journalism schools do more than train students for the news industry workforce, researchers carving out the emerging field of journalism studies, alternative media, media reform movements that are sort of trying to redefine what journalism is and can be, and a hyper commercialized news industry that degrades journalism when it treats communities solely as markets, audience, and strictly as consumers. I mean, in fact, the pedagogical philosophy has been learning by doing, and the standards employed have been those of the mainstream news media. I mean, the pressure to redefine journalism education warrants a much more sophisticated response from South Asian journalism educators than we have seen to date. I mean, South Asian journalism educators need to engage in the redefinition of what constitutes a well-educated journalist and what contribution journalism schools could make to journalism as an evolving practice. I mean, the real driving force behind the redefinition of journalism education is the recognition that there is a social need not being filled, and journalism schools could help fill that need. I mean, the call to redefine journalism education is also a call to take journalism seriously, to perceive it as a key social institution, to live up to the responsibilities implied by constitutional guarantees of a free press. In fact, the question journalism's contribution to democracy is not to make light of the ideal, but to scrutinize the ability of journalism as it is practiced to serve that ideal. In fact, journalism is a practice founded on ideals with truth, objectivity, accuracy, balance, and fairness foremost among them. I mean, a starting point for journalism education surely must be then to delve into these ideals, to question their viability. How accessible is the truth? How do we recognize it if we find it? What does objectivity mean? Is objectivity a useful ideal? What do balance and fairness mean? And how do we operationalize them? In fact, a journalism education confined to teaching practical skills repeats and reinforces journalism's mythological claims rather than turning those claims into hypotheses to be tested. And this is where theory comes in. In fact, those who criticize theory, like social theory, political theory, or even communication theory, as academic, as with no practical application to journalism, overlook the fact that theories or ways of understanding always inform practice. Journalists need to understand the theoretical premises that guide their work. Journalism schools already subscribe uncritically to a theoretical framework that informs even the most practical courses. I mean, the problem is that these theories are rarely made explicit, they're rarely called into question. And when they are identified at all, they are rarely presented competing alternative theories. I mean, the conventional theoretical framework is comprised of, among other beliefs, the democratic theory of the press, whereby journalism serves democracy as opposed to serving economic and political power. I mean, a reflection theory of the media, whereby the media reflect rather than construct society, or even a theory of objectivity, which fails to account adequately for human subjectivity, and a theory of liberal pluralism, whereby truth emerges by giving voice to a range of diverse viewpoints. Theory, in other words, cannot be diverse from practice. Theory infuses practice. It is in large part explains the particularities of a practice like journalism, and it addresses journalism's most fundamental questions. What is journalism for? Why are we doing this? Who are we serving with our practice? The answer to these questions serve as guideposts at every stage of reporting and editing process, from determining whether an event is newsworthy to deciding on a specific story lead to determining whether the story is placed in the newspaper or newscast. Every news story, from the most serious to the most trivial, requires an explanation, a justification, a theory behind its production. In fact, a necessary part of teaching students how to do journalism then is not only making them familiar with the theories that inform the practice, but making those to turn assumptions into questions. Does this practice serve the community? If so, how? If not, can the practice be changed? So, if classroom teaching of basic reporting skills has been the strength of Indian journalism schools, it can further be enhanced by the introduction of courses devoted to scholarly concerns, that is, history, theory, gender, diversity issues, discourse analysis, and so on, as well as the blending of theory into skills courses. It is also to make practice as praxis. Every skill course provides an opportunity to address theoretical concerns, how language works, including visual languages, how a given story informs or provides an alternative understanding of its subject, where information comes from, and who gets to speak as a source, what dominant frames are being employed to define a news event. Journalism does not belong to the news industry alone. If journalism is not to be merely a commercial enterprise, if it is to satisfy its own idols of serving people as members of a democratic community, then it needs help that we can provide as researchers, as teachers, but also as activists, public speaker, public intellectuals, critiques, even assuming our role as journalists. So, how journalism schools should adapt and help shape this new environment and how they are to incorporate theory and research will require careful thought. In fact, the goal of journalism education is to serve journalism and to serve journalism by helping to shape its future in all the forms it is likely to assume. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that education does not become obsolete simply because rapid and multiple developments in media and its culture and technologies have increased uncertainty about the creation, acquisition, and circulation of knowledge. Instead, I would submit by saying that the need for education becomes much more urgent because the importance of differentiated understanding of media induced forms of knowledge is instead heightened. As certainties become fewer, the importance of journalism education becomes much more greater. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Das. I think now we can thank all our panelists and the organizers of this conference and the audience who have paid their attention to listen to this roundtable. We hope that there will be a much more engaged discussion in future when we meet again. Thank you very much.